Well, thanks so much for joining us for this edition of Making Sense, where we talk about our finances, our financial institutions, the current trends, as well as what's on the horizon. Joined today by Alex and Justin from Forest Area Federal Credit Union. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Today we are talking about credit and debit card interchange fees. And this is something that I know very little about. You have warned me, it's kind of complex. So we're going to step through exactly what these are and the impact they're having. Sound like a good deal?
Let's do it.
Okay, now you for full disclosure, this is something that matters, but it's also something that can be challenging to understand, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it is a very confusing piece of the financial industry.
But it's important. So we're going to take the time and do the work today. And luckily, we brought you guys in as experts to help us understand this. All right, so let's start off very first with what are interchange fees?
Yeah, so just out of the gate, interchange fees are fees that are charged in order to be able to run transactions from a debit card or a credit card. The fees are paid from a merchant, so from a retailer, financial institution, to the individual cardholder's financial institution. So like, let's say you go to a Walmart, you use your debit card at Walmart, whatever financial institution that Walmart is using, that financial institution then sends money to the cardholder's financial institution. So let's say if it was us, Forest Area, let's say Chase sends money to Forest Area to be able to run that transaction through the network, which that's a whole nother confusing thing is the network, what that looks like. But that's where the fee is charged from and who it goes to, just in a general sense.
So we've heard like, oh, it costs businesses money to offer a credit card option. That's why sometimes I guess maybe there's a limit, or sometimes some people prefer. Is that what we're talking about when we say, oh no, it costs money to run a credit card? Is that what we're talking about? These interchange fees?
Exactly. So then what happens after that fee is transferred from the institution to the institution is the originating institution. So let's say Walmart's financial institution, if it was Chase, they then charge Walmart to be able to run that transaction. And so then Walmart may pass that fee along. Walmart's just an example, obviously. You have some of the smaller mom and pop shops that they may struggle a little more to be able to pay those fees. So they may be passing that along to then the consumer. So that's where those fees are from, is what it costs to run a debit card through.
I think it's important, Mark, to make the distinction early on in our conversation here that the interchange fees we're talking about, we as consumers, as we're going out and buying goods and services, using the plastic cards in our wallet or purse, we are not directly paying those fees. You're not going to see an interchange fee on your bank statement or your credit card statement. These are really the fees that are occurring between merchants, financial institutions, and then the other parties that are involved in transmitting that data. So, as individual cardholders, basically all of our viewers, you're not going to see that you're charged these fees, and you're not being charged directly. The way they can impact you, just reiterating the most recent comments from Alex, is that in one way or another, these fees are often passed on through the price of the good or service that you're buying, right? Because it becomes a cost of doing business for that merchant, that retailer, as well as the financial institutions on the other end, or the organizations that run that data between the 2 points. So not a direct fee to the consumer, but again, something that ultimately they're covering through their end price on the good or service you're buying.
So this is not go ahead.
I was just saying there are some retailers that have begun to pass it along in terms of increasing the transaction cost by 2% to run a card. So it is mostly in pricing, but some have been beginning to do that through the upcharge. But for the most part, you're not going to see it.
So it's not an obvious fee where sometimes, and this may be a bad example because this may be kind of related, but when we use an ATM that's out of, and it clearly says there will be a $2 fee for using this ATM, that's obvious. Okay, we're paying a fee for this, but most of us have probably been partaking in this fee or using this fee that doesn't really involve us, but we're not paying it right then, and we're not aware that we're doing it. But as you both said, we may down the road be helping that business cover that fee with an increase in price. Is that accurate?
Yeah, there are some merchants that do say there's a 2% upcharge if you use a credit card at this to be able to pay for this. But for the most part, it is through pricing. So that's another piece of where it is confusing, because most of them don't, but there are a handful that are passing it along as a percentage increase.
Passing along I'm not making a case that these are good or bad, but passing along the cost of offering that service to the customer, that option of payment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So how are these fees calculated?
That is a $1 million question, Mark. There's a few things that play into how they're calculated. One of the things is the type of transaction. So what I mean when I say that is, are you using a debit card or are you using a credit card? There are some times when you go to use your card that is a debit card. So it's not a loan product. You're using a card for funds that you already have in an account. It can either be run as a debit or a credit card. So sometimes you go to pay for it and you can push red for credit, or you can type in your PIN. Those two different ways that you can pay the reason for that is because it's two different ways that the interchange comes back. Now that's a very simple way to say what really happens in the background of that's how it impacts the retailer and the consumer. It basically, that determines how it gets from the merchant's bank to the financial institution from the cardholder. Sure. But that impacts the interchange income. There was, in 2010, I believe it was, there was a regulation that was passed to limit the amount of debit card interchange that can be charged. And so when you go to places like Walmart, they force you, if you use a debit card, to use it as debit because it's less cost to them. So that impacts it. Also, what impacts it is the type of merchant it is. So when I say merchant, retailer, whatever, whether it's a gas station, whether it's a restaurant, whether you're going to a grocery store, it all impacts the interchange. So you see a lot of these high reward credit cards, and they'll have like 5% on gas. Well, the reason why is because gas has a higher interchange fee than, let's say, your typical, grocery store, for example. That's why they may pay more for you to use your cards in those places. The other thing is whether it's a business card or a consumer card, because businesses have higher interchange than consumers. So all that to say, that's where it gets really confusing, trying to figure it out. There's a lot of variables when it comes to this fee that is charged to the merchants.
So, all right, not to completely take us off course, but something you said there, does it cost a business less? And there may be no answer to this, but does it cost a business less to run a debit card than a credit card?
Yes.
Okay, so are we doing a favor? Take all the other factors of why you'd want to use one versus the other. But if we go into a local mom and pop shop, is it to their advantage that we use a debit card?
In theory, yes.
In theory,
based on the fees. Yep.
Okay. All right. Makes sense. All right. Who sets the fees then?
Yeah. So another good question, because there's a lot of variables involved to this. Typically, your MasterCard or Visa, the card network is who has a fee schedule. But again, there are a number of factors involved in this. Regulatory, like we just talked about with the Dodd-Frank Act in 2010, they can have an impact on it. There's actually the individuals that created that are also trying to work on lowering the credit card interchange fee as well. So the regulatory can impact it, as well as the retailers. So I talk about Walmart a little bit. They do have the ability to negotiate what those fees are and how low that they can get them based off of their volume. So there's a number of factors that influence what it is, but ultimately it's the card networks that have the ability to set the pricing.
And the purpose of what the purpose of these fees, we've kind of talked about it. It covers the cost of doing business, right? So what happens to that? What is the cost of doing business? It feels like it's electronics. Are we paying for computers and systems? And so what are we what's getting paid for with these fees?
So there's a number of things, and here's where maybe some as consumers we can consider this whole fee thing going on behind the scenes as a benefit to us. There's a convenience, right? It's I know that there are a lot of us out there that prefer to operate on a cash basis, and there's benefits to doing that. There's also benefits to using the plastic in your wallet or purse to make your purchases. The convenience of having access to that buying power in the moment without having to have a stock of cash in your purse or wallet, that's a convenience. So being able to transact business electronically in that way is a convenience. It's a convenience for the merchant as well as the consumer. So, naturally, you're going to have to pay somebody for that convenience. The next thing I think you're buying in many cases is some protection and peace of mind, because when you're utilizing cards, often, depending on the card issuer in the program, there's protections in place. You're protected against fraud. You're protected against, in often cases, purchases that you legitimately make, but maybe there was a problem with the purchase. If the item is defective or isn't shipped or delivered, all of these things, naturally the merchants and other companies try to remedy that. But these cards often have protections to you as the consumer where you may not be liable for that charge, that amount of money, if the transaction didn't go as it was expected. So in doing that, we as consumers are getting the convenience and getting some protection on the back end as a result of these fees that are happening in the background.
Yeah, one thing to add to that is the risk that's involved from a financial institution perspective for the fraud. Debit card fraud, credit card fraud is significant. And Justin's talking about that. But depending on the size of the financial institution, it can be tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, or millions of dollars, depending on the size of what is lost when it comes to fraud on these cards. And so the interchange income that is earned on that for a financial institution, that helps pay for that, to be able to offset some of those expenses that we have for fraud losses. Because ultimately that lands on us, the financial institution, to carry that burden. There's been times when there's retailers that may have cybersecurity issues. Information gets sent out, debit card information, whatever, and then we have the brunt of that cost, not only for the fraud that's involved with it, but also reissuing all those cards. So we have to take on the cost because those cards aren't cheap. I mean, there's the chips that are in them, everything that goes into them, there's a fee for it. So we ultimately have that cost to be able to do that reissue or anything like that. So there's risk on our side, and that helps to alleviate some of that risk for us to be able to provide that to our consumers, to our members, in a way that we don't have to increase our loan rates or decrease our share rates, so the card program itself can pay for itself.
So to recap that, the fee covers more than just the cost of doing that transaction. It covers the cost of having this as an option, right?
Exactly.
Is that accurate?
100%.
Okay. Other than being able to provide us security and stuff, how do these fees impact people that don't even know that they exist? Until today, I didn't really understand how these things took place. How does that impact me, the fact that there's a fee?
Yeah, I'll go back to kind of what I just was talking about when it comes to it being able to pay, the card program being able to pay for itself, and us not having to raise loan rates or decrease share rates or even charge a membership fee, like a monthly fee or anything like that. The cards are able to take care of themselves. So then we have the ability to pay for it. So we're not having to charge a different way to our individual members. It's based off of when they use their cards.
So to go back, and pass this along to the consumer, because eventually everything kind of seems to trickle down to the consumer, right? Whether we're talking interchange fees or tariffs or whatever, the customer ends up paying, right? But explain one more time. You did once, but explain one more time who's paying who for when a transaction actually takes place.
Yeah. So the way that it works is an individual goes to the store,
okay,
and they swipe their card.
Right.
So the transaction goes from the financial institution, from the merchant,
right,
and to the financial institution from the cardholder.
Okay.
And then to be able to do that transaction, there is a fee that is passed along to be able to make that happen. The fee is paid from the retailer or merchant's financial institution to the cardholder's financial institution. And then what happens is the merchant's financial institution then charges the merchant a fee independent of the interchange. So that fee is then passed along. And typically that fee is a percentage of the transaction as well as a fixed cost. It could be like for debit cards, it's typically 0.05%, but also there's a 21-cent charge for every transaction. So there's a fixed plus a variable within that transaction that gets passed along.
So is it accurate to say, if I'm understanding that, is it accurate to say that like a bank that has more customers that utilize a credit card is going to collect more fees than a bank or a financial institution that has fewer?
Yeah, because
it's to compensate the financial institution for offering that, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
Credit cards have a higher interchange rate than the debit cards. So
Okay.
Absolutely.
Can anyone avoid these fees? Whether you're a customer or a business, a bank, can anyone avoid them?
By and large, you really can't if you're using that card. I think where you have the choice is if you're at a merchant and they tell you or they display that there's an additional charge to process a card transaction. They're going to charge a 1.5% of the total transaction. They're going to add that on. If they have that option, you can avoid it by not paying with the card, or in any transaction, avoid being involved in interchange fees by paying with a method other than a card. And, especially if you're dealing with local businesses, if you have the option to pay with cash and you're so inclined to do that, one, you can save yourself if they're charging an additional convenience fee to run the card transaction. You can save that for yourself, and in the end, it's helping them save a little coin also.
And does the same hold true with, obviously there's a big difference, obviously, between cash and a credit card. But again, just so that we understand the take-home lesson, if we're sensitive for our local businesses or whatever, and we don't want them to have to incur that, is it an advantage for us to use our debit card compared to a traditional credit card when it comes to these fees?
Yeah, there's typically, like I said, a lower fee when it comes to debit cards. So if you're being mindful of the small business owner, that would be one way to consider that. But on the flip side, you'll see some reward programs that the way that you get maybe the incentive is for it to be signature based, which is considered running the debit card as credit. So there's a few things that you have to keep in play there to be aware of. Not a lot of people have rewards on debit cards anymore, but some do. And if that's why you use it, you'd want to be mindful of how you earn rewards. And the reason for that is very obvious of what we're talking about. The financial institution will receive more interchange by using it as a signature based versus PIN based.
And again, these interchange fees help make that help give us that option. But it also provides there are services that as consumers we probably appreciate, and I'm certain we take advantage of in terms of the protections and the steps that are being put in place to protect us and give us that security of using a credit card. That's what some of that money goes to help cover that cost, right?
Yes.
You bet. And even on the merchant side, Mark, some merchants will prefer to take card transactions over checks and cash. Not all, but some may. It reduces the amount of employee power they have to put into it. If they're handling cash, they've got to then get that cash to their bank or credit union. Sometimes they have to do that under dual control. It takes more time and money, and oftentimes they're happy to pay the convenience fee or the interchange fee because those card transactions from today are automatically in their account tomorrow, and they don't have to make a run to the bank. They don't have to worry about cash controls and things like that. So whether it's a large national chain retailer or a mom and pop shop, they all may have their own preferences as merchants as to how they collect payments, because sometimes they've found that it's more economical to use the cards than cash. Others prefer the cash. It can go either way.
And as a customer, if we don't have a reason to pick one over the other, is it okay to ask a business? Be like, hey, is that okay to ask? Like,
Yeah.
How do you supposed to run this?
Especially if they're offering a discount for one payment method or the other. Anytime any of us can save money, why not?
Good thing. All right. Anything else we need to know about credit and debit card interchange fees, gentlemen?
I think we covered a lot of the high level stuff when it comes to these. There is a lot of confusion around it. I know that you see the memes in the social media of what it looks like when you pay with cards and how the money just kind of disappears into the pockets of financial institutions. And I think just kind of shedding light on the reason why those things exist, it was important today. And hopefully that was apparent in the conversation.
And why I think it was, and why we may as consumers be seeing more signs on the little card readers and more policy changes at some of our local places. That may help us all understand why we're seeing those in more places. And then, and as a consumer, we have a choice to make.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Absolutely.
All right, gentlemen. Hey, I want to thank you so much for your time. Look forward to our next edition of Making Sense. Until then, be well.
Sounds good. Appreciate it, Mark.
Take care.